and welcome to Alan's Italy. Tonight we have with us once again um, Rick Hirst,
Hello.
who is going is Rick, who is going to narrate a show. Actually, it's the second half of a show we started a few weeks ago when we spoke about the Museum dell'Opera del Duomo, and we realized we had too much material, so we stopped. Not necessarily in the middle, but we stopped somewhere in during the progress of that show, and you're going to pick it up where we left off and continue. And two of the pieces that you're going to continue with are two of my favorite pieces in all of Florence. I'm not going to mention what they are because I don't want to prejudice the case. I'll tell you what the two pieces are later. I'm sure you can probably guess what one of them is. But before we do that, let me go to this here. Come on. Okay, give me a moment here to get everything moving correctly. All right, so there it is. This is show number 41, believe it or not. And okay, so here's the first thing I would like to talk about. First of all, I'd like to dedicate this show to the President of the USA. And I actually got the idea about 2 hours ago because I was watching Jon Stewart. Those of you who watch Jon Stewart know that he can be pretty funny at times. And one of the things he did today was he was talking about the President of the USA. But he wasn't talking about who we normally would think, the person who won the election. He was talking about the President of the United States of Arithmetic. And that person is Nate Silver. You know who Nate Silver is? Yes. Nate Silver runs a website called 538.com. And in 2008, Nate Silver predicted the election of Barack Obama almost, incredibly close to what it was eventually wound up being. It was quite amazing. And this particular time, he's the only one I read. I don't go to Gallup. I don't go to Pew. I don't go into any of these, different surveys, polls. I go to Nate Silver. So, about 3 hours before the results were announced, he still had Barack Obama winning the election by a very, very pretty large majority. So at about 10:30 on Tuesday night, I went to sleep with the issue in doubt, but I felt pretty confident that Barack Obama was going to win the election. So I went to sleep at 10:30 and woke up at about 4 in the morning to find out that he had indeed won, and it was no surprise to me. So tonight's show is dedicated to Nate Silver, the President of the USA. He uses a very you appreciate this because Rick is very erudite when it comes to mathematics, and I was a mathematics teacher, and I studied mathematics for over 40 years. And Rick actually talks about this stuff the way I used to talk about it, which is pretty, he knows what he's talking about. But Nate Silver uses a concept to do sampling that's very foreign to a lot of people in this country. And I don't want to get into politics really, but there's a lot of people in this country who don't believe in this particular concept. It's the concept of arithmetic. He uses arithmetic to decide upon who's, because it's all really arithmetic. So anyway, he's the President of the United States of Arithmetic, and this is dedicated to Nate. So I don't have a little thing because I just did this a couple of hours ago. Anyway, you're looking at this and you're probably saying, Greenwald's flipping out. He did that last week, and you're right, I did. And I said last week that on November 1st, 2012, which was last, I believe we did the show on November 2nd. So the day before was the 500th anniversary of the Sistine Chapel, which was, finished on November 1st, 1512. And I then did a little research because I wasn't quite completely comfortable with that. And I found out that indeed I was not exactly correct, that November 1st, 2012 was the 500th anniversary of Michelangelo finishing the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel not the Sistine Chapel being finished, but the ceiling being finished. And in fact, if you look at this picture that's currently on the screen, you will see that there is a back wall, which is Michelangelo's Last Judgment, which he didn't do until I think 20 years later, if not longer. So this is not what it looked like on November 1st, 1512. But if you could possibly cut out the back wall, that's what it looked like. So November 1st, 2012 is really the 500th anniversary of Michelangelo, like putting on the last finishing touch of the Sistine ceiling. So I thought I'd start today with just a little background on the Sistine Chapel, because the Sistine Chapel was actually started by Pope Sixtus IV, and he was Pope from 14. I'm going to have to read this because this week has been so busy. I didn't memorize. Usually I try to memorize this stuff, but I didn't this time. 1473 to 1481, and he started this chapel, and it was the architect was Giovanni de Dolci, and when it was finished, it was the part around the side. Now, not the ceiling, but these paintings along the side here that I'm now pointing to were done by famous Renaissance artists, and I have three of them that I wrote down because these are three of my favorites. Ghirlandaio, my favorite of all time, Botticelli, my second favorite, and Perugino did the around here, and I won't go into very much detail on that. And it was actually opened to the public on August 9th, 1483, for the Feast of the Assumption, which I could tell you it does take place in August because I've been there in August, and on the Feast of the Assumption, everything is closed. So I had that unpleasant experience. It functions as the venue for the election of a new pope by the College of Cardinals. And there is a chimney that actually, I think either you pointed this out to me or Frank Pelayo pointed it out, that the chimney that I was showing, it could have been Frank because I think he showed a picture of this also. Frank pointed out that the chimney is actually installed whenever they have an election of the Pope. And the purpose of that is that when the election takes place and the Pope needs, I believe, a two-thirds majority of the College of Cardinals, they take the ballots and they burn them. And if white smoke comes out, the populace is told that an election has taken place. If they put the ballots in the chimney and sprinkle it with some water, wet straw is put in with the ballots, so the smoke that comes out of the chimney is black, and the people will say, okay, well, that ballot didn't work, and we don't have a pope. So when they see the white smoke, they know that there's a pope. When they see the black smoke, they know that there isn't a pope. So that is the history of the Sistine Chapel. And of course, Michelangelo was given the commission in 1508, and it took him 4 years to do this, that ceiling, and it was finished on November 1st, and that's when the first people came in to see this incredible work. And this is, they've spruced it up recently, so it really looks fantastic. And the last time I saw it was in October of 2010, and it's very crowded, and it's difficult to get there because you have to go through these long, convoluted hallways. But it's very exciting to see it, and so that's the Sistine Chapel. And one more thing, I looked at November 1st because I had a whole list of all famous things that occurred, and here are some of the famous things that occurred on November 1st. In 1861, Abraham Lincoln made the worst decision of his presidency by choosing George B. McClellan as the General-in-Chief of the Union Armies. Now, I may get sued from this, but this is my opinion, strictly my opinion, and I've done a lot of reading on the Civil War. McClellan was the worst thing that happened to this country. And the reason is that even though he took over the army right after the First Battle of Bull Run, when it was in complete disarray, and he organized it into a fighting force, He fought a battle called the Battle of Antietam, which took place in September of 1862. And at that battle, Robert E. Lee should have been defeated because McClellan had a superiority in numbers. He found Robert E. Lee's plan of attack, so he knew that like 5 or 6 days in advance. And he also had an 18,000 man reserve that was never used in the battle. That battle should have ended the Civil War should have ended in the middle of September of 1862, but it went on for 3 more years and cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. So that was on November 1st, a very bad decision. The first meteorological observation took place in 1870 on November 1st. The concept of the Axis powers was coined by Mussolini. Mussolini coined that expression in 1936 on November 1st because he said that there is now an axis of friendship that runs from Berlin, Germany, all the way to Rome, Italy, and that was the concept of the Axis. The first hydrogen bomb was actually exploded on November 1st, 1952. Okay, so those are the little tidbits that we have there. And now we're finished with my little introduction there, and we begin with tonight's show, which is the Museum of the Duomo, Part 2. And of course, this is the cover sheet that I used for show number 36, which if those of you who were watching between 4 and 5 actually saw that show, we decided to put that show on as part 1, and then we go right into part 2. So you saw that one. And once again, this is the Museum of the Duomo is located. This is Florence. This is the Arno that runs, through it. And this is the Duomo right here. And the Museum of the Duomo is right back here, right behind the apse. I was going to say that. 1 second away. I was really going to say that, folks. Mm-hmm. Anyway, this is Florence, of course, and it's all right. That's the, this dome is the dome of San Lorenzo. This is the dome of the cathedral, the Campanile, and this is that incredible picture that actually Rick gave to me when we were doing that first show, and it shows you a really beautiful shot of the cathedral with the baptistry in the front and the Campanile, and you could actually even see this building in the back, which is the Museum of the Duomo. So this is a really wonderful picture of Florence. There's the museum. We're about to walk in, and Rick, the floor is yours.
Okay.
As well as the table.
All right. Just to recap a little bit, the Museum of the Duomo originally started as a building designed by Brunelleschi to house the officials that were appointed by the Republic and the Guild of the Wool Guild in Florence, in order to supervise the construction and decoration of the cathedral. The cathedral's first stone was laid in 1246. The original building was designed by Arnolfo de Cambio, and the Campanile was designed for the most part by Giotto. The original facade of the cathedral was designed by Arnolfo de Cambio, but it was dismantled in 1587 because at that time they thought it looked old-fashioned. And for several hundred years it stood without a facade. The one that you see here was finished in 1887.
Do I have that picture in here? Was that?
Yeah, the picture is in there at the end.
Really?
Yes.
At the end?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, primarily, the building today that houses the works of the Duomo is a museum, but it also is a 600-year-old organization which still maintains the building of the cathedral, its redecoration, and the repairs, which are very extensive because it's an old building. So this is a very, very old magistracy in Florence.
Okay, now this is I don't know if you want to really.
This is a picture of the lower registers of the Campanile, which we mentioned before in the previous program, and we'll come to once again the decoration around the lower registers.
Right.
Speaking of the Campanile, it is also decorated with 16 statues of saints and patriarchs and sibyls of the for church history. This particular one is by Andrea Pisano, and it's of King David. You'll notice it's not white marble. It actually is white marble, but this statue has not yet been cleaned. Nevertheless, you can see that it's beyond sort of a Gothic demeanor. Everything is a little bit more relaxed than usual. But this is, for the most part, these are the statues that were done by the Pisano workshop and Andrea Pisano himself.
Mm-hmm. So this was outside for hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years.
Got dirty.
Right, until the 1800s. Mostly it's coal dust in the last few centuries that it was up on the cathedral, because that's how they heated homes.
So let me ask you a question, and I don't want to throw a question at you that you're not prepared to answer, but maybe you are.
Okay.
So David was outside the Palazzo Vecchio from 1502, I believe, until I believe the 1800s as well.
Right.
Was that very dark also?
Yes.
It was.
It was, and it had been cleaned over and over again, some in situ.
Yeah.
And because of that, it lost all of its original surface polish.
So by in situ, you mean that during the time that it was standing in front of the palazzo, it was constantly being...
Well, it was cleaned often.
Yeah.
So
And that was clean, but this wasn't.
This wasn't cleaned.
Because that was considered like,
Well, it's a symbol of Florence.
Yeah.
And this one, while a wonderful statue, is just one of the many that decorated the Campanile.
Right. One of a lot, so...
Now you can see a tremendous difference. This is from the Campanile as well. This is Habakkuk, sometimes called Zuccone. Mm-hmm. He's an amazing piece of Renaissance sculpture by Donatello. Something that is completely agitated. You'll notice that his clothing, his vestments are agitated. Nothing seems restful or easy to take. His whole pose is a contrapposto of great dynamism. Donatello was the great precursor of Michelangelo, and you can see in this statue the facial features that betray anguish on the part of the prophet. So this is the next step along the line in the development of Renaissance art. Pisano was a precursor and learned a lot from Roman statuary. But Donatello, being the inventor that he was, went beyond that to actually portray the inner emotion of the person portrayed.
And he seemed to like offbeat things. He did those two. David, certainly the bronze one, was very offbeat.
Yeah.
And the next one we're about to look at is extremely offbeat. But this one, he liked to rile things up. He liked to really rile things up a little, didn't he?
He liked experimentation. That was one of the great aspects to him. And sometimes he was a little wild and crazy. He would mix Gothic and sometimes Romanesque features into his sculpture, and he did a tremendous amount of sculpture that exists today all over northern Italy.
Okay. Now, when you said zuccone, you smiled because you know the meaning of zuccone.
Yeah, it's Pumpkinhead.
Right.
So you can clearly see he's
Yeah.
bald.
Okay. So that's the
I mean,
nickname.
it's also unusual in a Renaissance sculpture to show somebody that's bald.
Right. I know that, and that's I knew when you smiled when you said zuccone because I've known it as zuccone, and I forgot what the what it was, but I knew it was something funny. So, okay. Oh, this isn't the one I meant, but okay.
Right. This is another statue from the Campanile by Donatello, and you can see it has the same agitation. Um, the uh, the interesting thing is that this is not Jeremias, but it's a one of the other probably Anias, one of the other prophets, and you can see that it has the same effect. As a matter of fact, his left arm is pulled back in the same manner
Yes.
as the Habakkuk. So he's trying to project out from the facade of the Campanile to engage the viewer more sharply.
Right. Okay. Shall I move on?
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
the one I meant.
This is an amazing piece of work by in Donatello's old age. This is Mary Magdalene in her old age, and it's unknown why this statue was made. The first time it's just mentioned in passing that it was in the baptistry in 1500. But there are no recollections as to who commissioned it, what program it was for, or anything like it. It's carved out of poplar wood, and as in many wooden statues during the Renaissance and the Middle Ages, it was actually painted. But the effect of the paint has worn off over this time. It was actually discovered that it was painted when it was restored after the 1966 flood in Florence, and they discovered that it was actually the hands, the arms, the hands, the feet, the legs, and the face were actually painted flesh colored, and the hair was gilded, and in some places tow was glued to the hair in order to make it appear more hair-like. So it's a typical religious statue, but it's also one of the most expressionistic statues from the Renaissance. Usually Mary Magdalene is shown as a pretty woman, young, with the attributes of a skull and an ointment jar, and sometimes a cross. But in this case, she's shown in complete agony. This is someone who has gone through starvation. She's gone through penance. She's gone through tremendous agony in order to be in spirit with Christ. And you can see that Donatello did everything he possibly could to accentuate the anatomy and the fragility of the figure, the thin legs, the thin arms, the hands that barely meet in prayer. She's practically toothless, and the eyes are lost back into sockets. And you can see that in her, her right foot, it's slightly slipping off of its base.
Yeah.
So that it gives this sense of uneasiness, tremendous agitation, and that's actually what later Donatello is famous for. So this was done roughly in 1455 at the height of the Renaissance, and it was truly a shocking piece of statuary. It elicited many negative reactions because it showed such piety. So it's one of his greatest.
She's an enigmatic figure anyway.
Right.
You
There's
know, whenever
actually,
you hear about this latest rumor that Jesus may have been married, they always
Yeah.
say that Mary Magdalene could have been. You know, there's always like a lot of supposition and guesswork about who exactly Mary Magdalene was.
Yeah, there were
Was he?
actually.
Was that on his mind?
I don't know whether it was on his mind. I think what was on his mind was showing extreme piety and the attempt to seek forgiveness. There's a story that this was actually carved for a convent in Florence that was the refuge for old prostitutes who had no longer any place to stay, and that this was supposed to echo their need to find solace in their lives. So it could be that. Mary Magdalene herself, there's actually not that much known about her. A good chunk of the stories about her are from the Golden Legend, which was a fable created during the Middle Ages.
Right. I remember the first time I saw this, which was in July of 2001.
Yeah.
It just blew me away. I mean, you can't help but see this without kind of just standing there and just staring at this thing. It's just unbelievable.
Yes, it's a remarkable piece. I haven't seen anything. It's sort of northern in a way. Many northern statues, Pietas, Mary Magdalenes, and so forth. Many of them have the same agonized appearance, and of course, it reflects more northern sensibilities. But I don't know whether, in fact, it came from that.
Okay, shall I move? Okay.
We had talked about this in the last show, but this is a portion of the visual encyclopedia of late medieval Gothic concepts of the world. It talks about virtually everything. This is just a small sample of the plaques that are around the Campanile, talking about all of the trades, all of the concepts, the history of the world, the contents of the Bible, the history of the church. It was literally a visual compendium of everything that they knew in the Gothic.
Do we know who did these?
Yes, for the most part, they were done by Andrea Pisano and the Pisano Workshop. Some were designed by Giotto, but executed by Pisano Workshop. A few were done by Della Robbia.
Now, I've always wanted to ask you this question, and I always seem to forget. These sculptors and painters seem to know a tremendous amount about the Bible. Were they just tremendously schooled in that area, or did they have researchers who helped them to understand many of the concepts?
Well, there's a long tradition of the Catechism in the Catholic Church, which steeps people in the history of not only biblical history but church history, the history of the saints, the history of the major events that colored the church's development. There also were masters of protocol that were attached to the operae in order to explicate the program that was to be explained by the decorations. And so all of these were passed by, or sometimes prearranged by, the people who did the protocol for the church.
Right. Okay. So they had plenty of guidance, I suppose. There's one.
Yeah, this is this is by Pisano. This is really charming. It's the birth of Eve from Adam's rib. And it's sort of done in this slightly primitive way, but you have to realize that these plaques had to be seen from 100 feet, 200 feet away, so as to make them their understanding plain.
Right. Uh-huh. Beautiful.
And this of course, is one of the examples of the trades shown by also the Pisano workshop. This is of a sculptor in his workshop, as you can see, carving a nude, sort of sitting down, carving a small one. And we've learned a great deal from not only these small plaques, but also from the hundreds of miniatures and small paintings that
Yes.
are in the museums. That's what we learn a great deal about social history in the Middle Ages.
And it's interesting the way he's doing it. It's sort of like between his legs there, and he's kind of leaning over.
Right.
You don't think of sculpting this. I mean, I'm not a sculptor, so I don't know anything about this stuff, like, you know, like you would, for example. But, you know, you kind of think of the figure is there and they're sculpting, you know, but, you
Right.
know, this guy's in a pretty comfortable position. It's nice to see that, you know, you're comfortable when you do this stuff. Are you comfortable when you do your sculpting?
I usually stand.
Usually stand.
I usually stand.
Right. Okay.
But this is a small statue, and he's obviously working on a type of bench which allows him to rotate the statue.
Oh, right.
So, and gravity is sort of holding it down.
Right. Okay.
Well, here we have
This is
a painting by Daniele
Il-
del Volterra
of Il Divino.
of Il Divino, the great master Michelangelo.
Let me get rid of this. Uh-oh. We don't want that. Let me move on, which I can't. Okay, there we go. Okay, that was a little weird.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, then we're there. Now we're there. This is the work.
This is one of the 3 or 4 pietas done by Michelangelo. The first
Right.
one was done when he
Now-
was 23.
Explain what you mean by 3 or 4.
Okay. There are 3 that are definitely accepted as these pietas by Michelangelo. This is the first, or not the first, actually, this is the second. The first one is the Pietà in Rome. And that's the first one which he did for the Cardinal of Portugal. And he was only 23 years old. It's an amazing piece of sculpture, finished to the nth degree. It is beyond a doubt the finest piece of work that he ever did. And it's all of his alone. There are 2 others that are well recognized. There's this particular piece, which is maybe a pietà, maybe a deposition, maybe many things. But at any rate, this is the second. And the third one that's well known is the Rondanini Pietà in the Museo Civico in Milan. Now, the fourth one is the Palestrina Pietà, which is in the Accademia in Florence. But there's some doubt as to whether, in fact, that is by Michelangelo's hand. So that's why there are.
Now you're
3
saying
or
this
4.
was the second,
Yeah.
but he was.
No, pardon me, not second in order. The second one was the Rondanini, and this was the last
Okay.
one that he did.
Okay.
This particular one is more than just a Pietà, because the history of the Pietà is that it shows the dead Christ in Mary's lap, and she is lamenting over his death. This one shows Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary, and then a tall person who looks somewhat like Michelangelo standing over the dead Christ. And it could be either Nicodemus or Joseph of Arimathea. And that's not known. Actually, it's not known when this statue was begun. It is not known why it was actually destroyed. There are many reasons why they think it was destroyed, and it was primarily done for his own Michelangelo's own tomb, which we don't know where his own tomb was supposed to be. Originally, he mentioned that he wanted it to be in Santa Croce in Florence. Vasari says that he wanted his tomb to be in Santa Maria Maggiore, but he didn't say what city, because there are many of them. And so it's unknown why he did this. It was never commissioned. It was a piece of stone, supposedly, that he had just had around himself, and he would work on this day by day just to keep himself amused. Now, the subject of this is also an unknown quantity, because it's so complicated, partly because Christ's leg is actually a thwart on top of Mary's leg, and it's no longer visible there because he had broken off the lower limb.
Purposely?
Purposely. Okay. And Condivi wanted to put it back, but they decided not to do that, because in order to put it back, they would have had to have chopped into Mary's leg. So there were a lot of odd things about this particular statue. The one greatest thing about it is that it's an encyclopedia of all of the methods that Michelangelo used for carving. So it's wonderful because you can see the polished features. You can see the roughly carved areas and some of the finely carved areas where he used the gradina, the tooth chisel. And the one complete or almost completely finished part is actually not by Michelangelo. Mary Magdalene is by Condivi. It was finished by Condivi.
Now, Condivi was his biographer,
Right.
but he was also a sculptor in his
Right.
workshop.
He was one of the
see.
sculptors in
I
the
didn't know.
workshop.
Okay, good, good.
The now it was thought that Michelangelo began this statue when he was saddened by the death of Vittoria Colonna, one of his great correspondents, and they met very frequently in a group to talk about the renovation, the renewal of the Catholic Church after the beginning of the Reformation in Northern Europe. When she died, he fell into this incredible depression, of which he had many times fallen before. And according to one story, this working on this particular group was something that helped him. He was in his 70s, almost 80, when he did this. Mm-hmm. So you can see that he still had the strength and the power to still carve an over life-size marble group.
Now, a pietà differs from a deposition.
Right.
Explain that
Okay.
a little bit.
The various stages of the Passion are sort of divided into steps. Mm-hmm. One of the steps is the deposing from the cross. That is to say, Nicodemus helped to take out the nails and lower him to the ground, and that act is called a deposition. It is not clear that this is solely a deposition, because it's not clear who actually is in the background, who is that wonderful tall figure in the that seems to be Michelangelo himself. Others believe that it's a deposition into the grave, into the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, but that sort of is belied by the fact that the leg was on top of Mary. And the collection of Mary and Mary Magdalene and Nicodemus seems like an odd combination of things. It's not something that's necessary, that's often seen in Renaissance sculpture.
And a pietà is Mary just, the body comes down from the cross and she has Jesus
There's
on her
her
lap,
on
and
her lap.
she's, just
Lamenting
lamenting
over her. So it could be a lamentation, it could be the pietà itself, it could be a deposition, it could be an entombment.
right.
No one quite knows what it is.
Right. Okay. Shall I?
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah.
That's a back view.
That's a back view, and you can see very clearly that it was going to be put into a niche. Probably, according to Vasari, it was going to be put into a niche above an altar in where he was going to be buried, and in front of the altar, in the floor of the church, is where he was going to be entombed.
Now, when you say it was intended for, how do you know it's intended for a niche by just looking at it?
Well, in general, you can tell a statue is intended for a niche because the treatment of the back in any niche sculpture in the Middle Ages and in the Renaissance was almost left unfinished. If you look at the back of the Pietà in Rome, it's pretty much unfinished. If you look at the back of the Bruges Madonna, that's relatively unfinished. Most of these were unfinished because you were not being paid for for finishing it in the round.
Very interesting. But David is finished.
Because it's in the round.
It was intended to be
in
out
the
somewhere. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, I'm moving
Yeah.
on. You can see the lucky people there. Now this is not a well-visited spot. The Museum of the Duomo doesn't get too many tourists.
No, it doesn't get.
So this is a great place to see
right.
A Michelangelo sculpture.
Well, first of all, you can get up close to
Right.
it.
I mean, it's not behind glass as the Pietà in Rome is. Yeah.
That's correct. That's correct. So you can actually see how he went about carving. So this
I
is.
remember you going around it and couldn't get you away from this.
Right.
I mean, I could spend 15, 20 minutes looking at this. You could probably spend an entire day.
Well,
if
I
not
have.
more. Yeah, I know.
So
I would imagine.
it's really quite remarkable.
Okay, let's.
Okay, this is another part of the opera. It shows some of the tools, lifting equipment, molds, patterns that were used in the construction of the cathedral. Actually, it's fairly extensive, and it shows some of the lifting devices designed by Brunelleschi in the construction of the dome. So this is a very, very interesting part of the opera, and as a matter of fact, you can see that's portion of the original wall of the opera. So the one designed by Brunelleschi.
And remember, to our viewers, an opera is a workshop, not a great, like Puccini. We're not talking about opera. We're talking about opera meaning a workshop.
Right, a work or a workshop.
Right. Okay.
These are among the architectural models. It was originally believed that this was by Brunelleschi or his workshop as a model for the dome of the cathedral. Since that time, when it's been restored, they've actually seen that there was another date on it in the 1673. But also it differs greatly in details from the actual dome. Nevertheless, it's an old architectural model, probably done in order to help those who would be repairing the outside surface or the inside of the dome. The original model was one that showed the dome, that's true, and the drum, which is the area below the dome, but had some extra features on the inside, which then convinced the committee to approve Brunelleschi's design.
Right.
And this is the lantern that goes on top of it, also designed by Brunelleschi.
Now the lantern, what part of the dome?
That's the cap on the dome. So you'll see there's a horizontal surface, and then that vertical piece that comes up. That's the lantern, and it's simply the cap for the dome. It covers up the eye of the dome. This is part of Brunelleschi's design. He didn't live to see it finished. It was finished by Michelozzo.
So prior to the lantern being put on the dome, was the dome open like the Pantheon? For example?
I actually don't know. It could have been open because the Pantheon has been open for 2,000 years.
Right.
So it could very well have been open to the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is an interesting architectural model. It's the new facade was proposed in the late 1400s, and this is one of the models that Michelangelo proposed for the central portion of the facade. They were going to tear down Arnolfo da Cambio's facade and put up another one that was more in keeping with the Renaissance style instead of the Gothic style. So this was his. It was done in 1507.
They didn't take Michelangelo's.
No, as a matter of fact, the whole process is so expensive that it takes hundreds of years to actually get something like this done. They may or may not have had the money. They were also involved in a lot more territorial disputes at that time and dynastic disputes. So it was not clear whether they were going to, change the cathedral facade.
Right.
Now this is another design. It's not by Michelangelo, but it's one that was probably done in the 1580s in order to clad the cathedral once again in a facade, which was taken down at the order of the Grand Duke of Florence.
And so there would have been this part in the front here.
That's correct.
Which to me resembles a little the Pazzi Chapel.
That's correct.
Do I have it nailed there?
Yeah. And the interesting thing about it is sort of this neoclassical facade. It's probably from the later 1500s.
Yeah, right. And by neoclassical, you're talking about
the Doric columns.
The pilasters.
Yeah.
Right in here.
Right.
Right. Very interesting. I like this facade. But
yeah.
Who gives it?
Yeah, it's very simple actually, and it shows very little decoration.
Yeah, I like it though.
Now these are from the 1871 competition for the cathedral facade. They finally decided that they were going to have the money to do this, and it was in cooperation between, believe it or not, the opera and the city of Florence. Once again, so these were some of the competition drawings for the facade. You can see it's all over the place. Romanesque style, Lombardic style, Pisan style. They had it, all over the place.
Right.
So here's a side-by-side picture. Before 1876 is on the left, and you can see that the cathedral has absolutely nothing on it. It's just the understructure.
Okay, we're talking now about not the cathedral, but the facade.
The facade
So,
of the,
so
of the
let me
cathedral.
just, this is Giotto's Campanile. There's the dome. This whole part here, which is partially hidden, is the facade. You can see it's unfinished, and this is what it looks like after,
1887.
right, but still in the 19th century.
That's correct.
And this photo was, we should give the credit of the photo to the to one of the Alinari brothers. And this particular slide was created when I did the show Florence Then and Now, where I did Florence in the 19th century and Florence in the 21st century. But I decided to also throw in a picture of what the facade looked like before the 1870s and then after the 1870s. So this is a great comparison as to what the facade actually did wind up looking like.
Right. The the winner of the competition was Emilio de Fabris, who designed it in a neo-Gothic style, which was, in conformance with the Campanile and the baptistry. I mean, so it's all one piece. It's all in one style.
Right. Okay, we can see that fact. We only have a minute to go.
Okay, so these are the these are no longer in the opera. They're the last three panels from the doors on the baptistry by Ghiberti that were being finished in 2012. These three were put onto the doors of the baptistry, and so the doors that are there now are the originals.
And there's
And
the
the
baptistry. Right there,
And there,
there's the
the
door.
doors of paradise.
the doors of paradise, the east doors
Right.
that
This-
face the cathedral.
This is probably one of the great pieces of the goldsmith's art. Interestingly, Donatello was one of the team that was working on these doors.
But it was
Ghiberti's workshop, but he
Right.
was part of Ghiberti's workshop.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Very interesting. My next show is Frank Pelayo. That'll be next week, and he will be talking about his illuminated photo sculpture.
Great.
Yeah, so he's, I'm really excited about that. That's one of them right there, and we'll get a chance to ask him a bunch of questions. So that brings us to the end. I'd like to thank Rick once again for an incredible evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My audience, I'm sure, thanks you as well. And buona notte e buona fortuna.